We begin today the Mishnah on Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph. Zok the Mishnah, going back over here again to the halachas of the karbanis brought on Yom Tov. Ve'shamai yoimrim, ve'shamai say, mivi'in shlomim. You can bring a shlomim on the Yom Tov itself. This is whether it's a shalmei Chagigah or a shalmei simcha that is brought on Yom Tov, but ve'ein saimchen aleim. You can't do the smicha on the carbon. So the carbon shlomim itself could be brought because a part of this carbon is the meat that the bailim are going to eat from it. So just like any other shechita on a Yom Tov that you're allowed to do when there's a eichel nefesh, when you're eating from it. But you can't do smicha, as we learned yesterday in the Gemara, because there's a shvus, there's a ism d'Rabbanan to ride or to lean totally with pressure on the animal. Avaloi oilis. But you can't be makriv, the carbon oila, even the carbon oila sri'iyah, which has to be brought for Yom Tov when you come to the Azara, but that cannot be brought on Yom Tov because it's totally burnt on the Mizbeach. So Rashi here brings that Beshamei Darshan the Pasik, Yehu Levada Ye'oseh Lochem, Lochem V'loi Legavoya. That what's mutter on Yom Tov, the Malacha is only if it's Lochem, but not something that goes Legavoya on the Mizbeach. Beisil disagree and say, no, Mevi'in Shlomim, you can bring the carbon Shlomim on Yom Tov, and V'eilis, you can bring the carbon Eilah on Yom Tov as well, and also V'saimchen Alein, you could also do the Smicha. So Beisil is arguing on both points. B'negei to the Shlomim, Beisil holds that it is mutter on Yom Tov, they don't darshan this pasuk Lechem V'loi Legavoya, they darshan from Lechem that you can do Eichel Nefesh, but not if it's for a goy or if it's for a kelev or things like that. But if it's for the Eibishter, you're allowed to bring the carbon in even oilers. And in the Shlomim, you could do smicha as well. The smicha, because it's a mitzvah to do smicha, so the ism d'Rabbanan does not apply to this. So the Mishnah Atzeres Shachali is bad of Shabbos, when Shavuos comes out on a Friday. So right after Shavuos, the next day is Shabbos. So Bishamei Yoimrim, so Bishamei say, you can't bring any of the karbanis on Yom Tov itself, or at least not the carbon oila. Carbon oila you can't bring on Yom Tov. And maybe the carbon shlomim as well, if you want to. So when do you bring the karbonis? So Yom Tvayach Acha Shabbos. They had a designated day of Yom Tvayach, the day that they slaughtered all the karbonis, and that was on Sunday, the day after Shabbos. Rashi here says that this Yom Tvayach goes both on the carbon oilas ri'iyah and also on the carbon Chagigah. Taisva says that l'chayre it doesn't go on the carbon Chagigah. Carbon Chagigah Beishamai said that you could bring on Yom Tov. You just can't do the smicha on Yom Tov, but you could bring it on Yom Tov. Beisil will say, Ein Yom Tvayach Acha Shabbos. There's no reason to have a Yom Tvayach, a special day designated to slaughter all the karbanis after Shabbos, because Yom Tov itself, you can bring it on Yom Tov. Beisil will agree, Shemchal Eliyos b'Shabbos, that if Shavuos came out on Shabbos itself, so then even according to Beisil, you can't bring the karbanis on Shabbos itself. It's not Deicha Shabbos. Sheyem Tvayach Acha Shabbos. So then the day of shechting all the karbanis will be on Sunday after Shabbos. So another interesting din, the Mishnah says, b'negei to a Shavuos that comes out on a Shabbos, and then you have Sunday. Ein Kohen Gadol mislabish bekelov. So on that Sunday, the Kohen Gadol should not wear special garments on this day. What's the reason for this? So Rashi says, when it says here kelov, what kind of garments are we speaking about? Rashi says that it's speaking about Yom Tov Diga clothing or Shabbos Diga clothing. You should not wear Shabbos Diga clothing on that Sunday, and the reason is because the Tzaddikim, they said that Shavuos always comes out on a Sunday. You start counting Sfiris HaOmer Memachras HaShabbos, which means on a Matzah Shabbos on Sunday, and then Shavuos will always come out on a Sunday. So therefore, Lahoitzi milibon shel tzaddikim, in order to show that the tzaddikim are wrong, so on that Sunday, even though that Sunday was a very special day, that's the day that all Yidden brought their karbanis, so to some extent Yidden treated it like a Yom Tov, but nevertheless the Kohen Gadol should not wear special Yom Tov garments to show everybody that today is not Shavuos. Taisus says the same pshat. Taisus just says that when it says here kelov, it doesn't refer to stam Yom Tov Diga clothing, because then why does it say dafka the Kohen Gadol? This should be any of the Kohenim, or why dafka the Kohen Gadol? So he says because on the Yom Tov, usually there were the mishmarais in the Beis Hamikdash that got their turn, their week to do the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. Came a Yom Tov, so then the Kohen Gadol would be more involved in doing the avodah. So now it's the Yom Tvayach, and this is the day that the Kohen Gadol is going to come do the Aveda, because they didn't do any of the special of the Karbanis on Yom Tov. So the Kohen Gadol is going to put on a Shmeini Begadim to come and do the Aveda on this day. So the Mishnah is saying, when you get to the Kohen Gadol, that he shouldn't put on Karbanis Shmeina Begadim to show people that this is not a Yom Tov, this is not Shavuos like the Tzaddikim.
Can't do anything about it without
And a Chanami. So l'chayre, or at least Rashi here says this is not talking about b'shas aveda. So when he goes out b'beisay b'shuk, so Rashi here says according to Rashi that it's talking about not the big day kohuna, but l'chayre according to Taisvis we're talking about with the aveda itself, meaning that he should not do the aveda. L'chayre, that's the pshat of it according to Taisvis. Yeah.
He's only allowed to wear the begadim when he's doing it.
Correct. That's what I'm saying. So according to Taisvis, l'chayre means that he shouldn't do the aveda. L'chayre. The Mishnah continues, u'mutarim behesped u'betainis. That on this day you're allowed to have a hesped or a tainis as well. Shalei lekayim divrei ha'imrim atzeres achas Shabbos. In order that the tzaddikim that say that when the Shavuos fall out, it always falls out on Sunday after Shabbos, so they should see that today is not a Yom Tov, and you can even make a hesped and tainis on this day. Amar Rabbi Lazar, the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Yishiyah, Minayin la tzeres, sheyesh la tashlumin kol shiva. How do I know that Shavuos, if you didn't bring the karbanis for the Yom Tov on that day, so you have 7 days to make up to bring the karbanis? Shenemar, the pasuk says, b'chag hamatzis, b'chag Shavuos, b'chag Sukkos. When it speaks about the karbanis, it puts the 3 Yom Tovim together. So makish chag Shavuos l'chag hamatzis. We compare Shavuos to matzis, to Pesach. Just like Chag HaMatzis is 7 days, and you can bring the Karbanis all the 7 days. Chag HaShavuos, yesh la tashlumin kol shiva. So to Shavuos, you have tashlumin all 7 days. The lashon of the Gemara here is very interesting, because it says that Chag HaMatzis has tashlumin kol shiva. So the Mefarshim asked the question, why kol shiva? Should have said it has tashlumin kol shisha. The first day is not tashlumin. The first day is the day of the mitzvah. If you didn't bring it the first day, then you can make it up another 6 days. So the Rebbe in a Sikha explained, Chelik Chav Ches in a Shavuos Sikha, so the Rebbe says that the MS, even on the first day Gufa, you should bring it right away in the first opportunity in the morning when you can. And the Tashlum Kol Shiva is that if you didn't bring it right away in the morning, so then the rest of the day is already considered to be a Tashlumin. The Amos says, the Rebbe there says that the Tashlumin of Kol Shiva, the Chiddush here is, usually a Tashlumin means that you're bringing the carbon after the time. You can make it up, but it's not considered to be anymore the Zman of the carbon. But over here, it's taka true that the Iker Zman of the carbon is the first day, especially regarding the carbon Chagigah. We learned before in the Gemara, it says V'chagoisam oisai, that it goes on the first day. But the Chiddush of this Tashlumin is that even the rest of the days are also considered to be the Zman of the carbon. But mitzad the person, the Zrizin Makdimin, so there's an inyan that the person should bring the carbon the first opportunity he has. And therefore, even within the first day Gufa, you should bring it right away in the morning. And therefore, the rest of the day is also called an inyan of Tashlumin. That's the taich of Tashlumin, Kol Shiva. Okay, so the Gemara compared Shavuos to Chag HaMatzis. Fragt the Gemara, ve'eme, but maybe I should say, makish l'Chag HaSukkos, compare Shavuos to Sukkos. Ma Chag HaSukkos yesh la Tashlumin Kol Shmeina. On Sukkos, you can make up and bring the carbon for 8 days, including Shmini Atzeres. Av Chag HaShavuos yesh la Tashlumin Kol Shmeina. Maybe I should say regarding Shavuos that you can bring the carbon in 8 days. And says the Gemara, no, you can't compare to Shmini Atzeres because Shmini regel b'fnei atzmayu. Shmini is a Yom Tov for itself, and if it's a Yom Tov for itself, so then you can't be mashlim. You can't bring the karbanis of Sukkos on that day. So the Gemara, but that's not true because Eimid Amri Shmini regel b'fnei atzmayu. Regarding what do we say that Shmini Atzeres is considered to be a Yom Tov for itself? So Hani Mili, this is only for the Inyan Pazar Keshav. Regarding 6 things of Pazar Keshav, which Rashi here says, the pay is pious, special lottery they made for the Kainim Zaveda, the Zayin is Zman, a special Shechiyanu, and the Reish is the Regel, which you don't sit in the Sukkah on this day, and carbon has a different carbon on this day, and then this is shiur, a different song that the Levium sang in the Beis HaMikdash, and the Beis is the bracha, which was a special bracha that they said then for the king that was leaving. Rashi here brings in those times, Vayavarchu is HaMelech, so there was a special bracha that they said then for the king on the 8th day. So regarding these 6 things, it's considered to be a special Yom Tov. Regarding making up the karbanis of the Yom Tov of Sukkos, the Shmini Atzeres, you could still make up for the first day. And the Gemara brings the Mishnah that we learned before, the Tanan, if you didn't bring the carbon Chagigah on the first day of the Yom Tov, Chagigah is kol regel, so you can bring it the rest of the Yom Tov, and also the Yom Tov Achron, including the last day, which is Shmini Atzeres. If so, why are we comparing Shavuos to Chag HaMatzos, that it's 7 days? Maybe compare it to Sukkos and it's 8 days. For the Gemara, tafasta meruba, loy tafasta, tafasta mu'et tafasta. Since you have an option here, the pasuk it mentions together with Shavuos, Sukkos and Pesach. So which one are you going to compare it to? If you compare it to the one that's more, how do you know that that's right? You compare it to the one that's less. If you compare it to the one that's less, that you know for sure is true, because 7 includes 8. If you're comparing it to the one that's 8 days, so maybe the kavanah of the Torah is not to compare it to that. So therefore, how do you know that that's correct? So therefore, we take the comparison to what's less. So the Gemara, so now, if that's the case, so Ella, if so, lemay hilchase kasver rachmana lechag Sukkos. Why is the Torah mentioning here Chag Sukkos? If we're only comparing Chag Shavuos to Chag HaMatzos, so there's no reason to mention Sukkos here. Answers the Gemara, la kushe lechag HaMatzos. We're actually comparing Sukkos to Chag HaMatzos as well. Why? Ma Chag HaMatzos, just like we find by Pesach, ta'on lina, that you have to stay overnight in the Beis HaMikdash, and only afterwards could you leave. Av Chag Sukkos, in other words, Matzah Yom Tov, that is. Only Matzah Yom Tov you're allowed to leave. Av Chag Sukkos, ta'on lina. So too by Sukkos, you have to stay overnight there, and only Matzah Yom Tov could you leave. And the Gemara brings the source by Pesach itself. V'hasa minalan, and where do you see regarding Pesach that you have to stay until Matzah Yom Tov? The pasuk says, "Ufanisa ba'boiker va'alachta lo yalecha," and you will go in the morning and you'll go back to your tent. And this morning refers to Chol HaMoed, Rashi says. How do we know that it refers to Chol HaMoed? Because it says va'alachta lo yalecha, you're going back home. And since on Yom Tov you can't travel out of the Tchum, so therefore, you see that V'alachta lo yalecha refers to Chol HaMoed. So you have to stay there. When it says Ba'boiker, it doesn't refer to the morning, to Yom Tov itself, but it refers to the morning of Chol HaMoed, because there's Isov Tchumen. Taisus points out that the Isov Tchumen is not Minat Torah, at least not according to most opinions. Rabbi Akiva holds it's Minat Torah, but there is a Isser of Tchumen, Minat Torah. The Tchum that we always talk about is the Tchum of Alpayim Amah, 2,000 Tamas. But Minat Torah, there's a tchum of Yud Beis Mil, that you're not allowed to go out of 12 mil. So when the Gemara here says, that Rashi here says, that there's Isser of tchum, and even Minat Torah is referring to this tchum of Yud Beis Mil. And that's how we learn out, this is a pasuk that it says by the Korban Pesach, that you have to stay until Ba'boiker, until Chol HaMoed. And therefore the pasuk here writes, Chag Sukkos, together with Chag HaMatzos, to tell you that by Sukkos as well, you have to stay until Chol HaMoed. Tanan, it said in the Mishnah, Atzeres shechol liyes erev Shabbos, that when Shavuos comes out on erev Shabbos. So Beishamai Yoimrim, Beishamai said Yom Tov achar Shabbos. So the day that all the karbanos are slaughtered is on the Sunday, because you can't bring them on the Yom Tov. Beis Hillel say Ein lo Yom Tov. There is no Yom Tov. You can bring the karbanos on the Yom Tov itself. So now, what does this mean? My love, don't you think that Beis Hillel was saying Ein lo Yom Tov klal? There's no such a thing to make up the karbanos that you could have brought on Shavuos itself. That has to be brought on Yom Tov itself. So this is a raya against what we're just saying here. Who was it over here that said this? Rabbi Lazar, in the name of Rabbi Oishia, that just like on Chag HaMatzos and Chag Sukkos, there's days of Tashlumin on Shavuos as well. But in the Mishnah, it seems from Beis Hillel's opinion, Ein lo Yom Tov. There's no other day you can make it up. So the Gemara says, Loi. What does the Mishnah mean? She'einat tzricha Yom Tov. All it means to say is that you don't need to have a Yom Tov. You have the option to bring it on Shavuos itself, so you don't need to designate that Sunday to be the day that everyone's going to bring the karbanos. But if you didn't, though, you still could. The Gemara, so now if so, what's the pshat here? My kamash malon, what is it coming to teach me? The makarvinon biyoyme. Beis Hillel is coming and saying that you could bring the carbon on Shavuos. Beis Shammai is saying you can't, and Beis Hillel is saying you could. But if so, that's exactly what they argue about in their first case, in the Reisha of the Mishnah. Why does the Mishnah have to say the same argument again regarding Shavuos? They were arguing about this regarding every Yom Tov. The Tanan, in the Reisha of the Mishnah, it said, that you can bring the carbon shlamim without smicha. But the carbon oyla you can't bring on Yom Tov. You can bring your shlamim and your eilis on Yom Tov and v'samchan aleim. You could do the smicha as well on Yom Tov. So that was the first argument in the Mishnah, whether it's an option to bring the eilah on Yom Tov or not. So how can you say that then when the Mishnah talks about Shavuos, that it's just repeating the same argument whether you have the option to do it on Yom Tov or not? So the Gemara answers tzriche. No, I need the Mishnah to say this machlokes again regarding Shavuos. But because if we would say the argument in the first case, so I would say baha ka'amri beishamai, that only over there in the beginning of the Mishnah, Beishamai said that you don't bring it on Yom Tov itself, and you could be mashlim, you bring it after Yom Tov, you bring it on Chol Hamoed, mishum da'av shalamacha, because over there it's possible to bring it, you could be mashlim it on the next day. But over here regarding Shavuos, so I would say that since Shavuos is just one day Yom Tov, there's no Chol Hamoed afterwards, and there's no days of Tashlumin, so then Eimeh Meidel le Beis Hillel. Maybe over here I would say that they agreed to Beis Hillel that Shavuos is different. Shavuos, there's no choice, you have to bring it on Yom Tov itself. So that's why the Mishnah had to spell out, even B'negei to Shavuos, that Beis Shammai holds that it's brought the Sunday after. V'yashminan Baha. And if we'd only say this case of Shavuos, then I would say maybe the reverse. Baha come to Beis Hillel. Over here, Beis Hillel said their opinion that it could be brought on Yom Tov itself, mishum lo yafshel lemacha, because you can't bring it tomorrow. Aval Baha, regarding other Yomim Tovim, when you get to Pesach and Sukkos, Eimeh Meidel Beis Shammai. Maybe they agreed to Beis Shammai that you have the time to make it up, to bring it on Chol Hamoed. Tzriche, that's why the Mishnah has to bring you both the first halacha regarding the other Yomim Tovim, and then it applies it also b'negei to Shavuos. So there's no question from this Mishnah. So there's no raya from this Mishnah to what he said before. But negate the days of the Tashlumin. Now the Gemara tries again. Another thing, another brayse. Tashema mishaloi chag shivas yimei Pesach. If he did not bring the carbon Chagigah on the 7 days of Pesach, Shmoines yimei Chag, or on the 8 days of Sukkos, including Shmini Atzeres. The Yom Tov Harishon Shel Atzeres, or you didn't bring the carbon Chagigah on Yom Tov of Shavuos. The Gra here takes out the word Harishon because there is no first or last day. There's only one day of Shavuos. So you didn't bring the carbon on the Yom Tov of Shavuos. So what does this price say? Shuv Ein Chagigah. You can't bring your carbon Chagigah anymore. So what does this mean? My love, don't you think this is saying Yom Tov Shel Atzeres, that you have one day, the Yom Tov of Shavuos itself, to bring the carbon, and after that there's no other day to make up. By the other Yomim Tovim it says 7 days for Pesach, 8 days for Sukkos, but by Shavuos it just said Yom Tov Shel Atzeres. So the Gemara answers Loi. It does not refer just to the Yom Tov. When it says Yom Tov Shel Atzeres, that expression regarding Karbanis, what does it mean? Yom Tvayach. It means the Yom Tvayach, the day that the Karbanis are brought. But fragt the Gemara, but it's still a question on what we said before. Because Ihachi, if so, Nivshet Mina, let's be patient, let's learn from here. The Chad Yom Tvayach. There's only one day, because it says Yom Tov Lashon Yachid Shel Atzeres. So you said before that we learned from Chag HaMatzah is that the 7 days that you can make up, just like by Chag HaMatzahs. So the Gemara says, Eimeh, we have to read in the Braise, Yimei Tvayach. That there are Yimei, and it's not just one day, there are Yimei Tvayach, there are 7 days to make up the Karbanis. So the Gemara Toshema, the Tani Rabbe Bar Shmuel. So there's a Braise, Rabbe Bar Shmuel learned, Amra Teira. The Teira says regarding Rosh Chodesh, Minei Yomim, count the days of the month, and V'kadosh Chodesh, and then sanctify the day of the month, and this is specifically the specialty of the day of Rosh Chodesh is Be'ikir, B'negei to the Karbanis that are brought on Rosh Chodesh. Minei Yomim, count the days, and this is from counting Sfiris HaOmer after Pesach, V'kadosh Atzeres, and sanctify the Yom Tov of Shavuos. Ma Chodesh L'menuyav, just like the Chodesh, you count the days and you sanctify the 30th day or the 31st day as the Rosh Chodesh. Afatzeres, so too when it comes to Shavuos, L'menuyav, you sanctify the day. There is no date in the Torah for Shavuos. You count the days, and then when it comes to the 49th day, you sanctify the 50th day. So the Gemara now explains, regarding what are we comparing Shavuos to Rosh Chodesh? Well, what's the significance of this comparison? My love, don't you think, Gomar Mechodesh, we learn now the Karbanis that are brought in Shavuos from the Karbanis that are brought in Rosh Chodesh. Ma Chodesh, Yom Echad, just like regarding Rosh Chodesh. So you count and you sanctify the day of Rosh Chodesh, and you have 1 day to bring the Karbanis on Rosh Chodesh. There's no Tashlumin for Rosh Chodesh. Afatzeres, so too when it comes to Shavuos, Yom Echad, Shavuos is 1 day, and the Karbanis of Shavuos are only that day, and you have no Tashlumin at all. So the Gemara answers, Omar Rave, so Rave said, no, punkt verkehrt. From this very comparison that it's based on counting, I see that there is tashlumin. V'tizbara, is this logical what you're saying, where you're comparing Shavuos to the Chodesh? Oto atzeres, when it comes to Shavuos, Yoimi maninon, we only count the days in order to come to the 50th day for Shavuos, but Shavui loy maninon, we don't count the weeks to come to the day of Shavuos. But Abaye said regarding Sfiris Aime, mitzvah lemimni yaime. There's a mitzvah to count the days. Dichsev tispuru chamishim yaim. So you're counting to 50 days. And also mitzvah lemimni shvui. There's a mitzvah to count the weeks as well. Dichsev shiva shavuos tispalach. That you count 7 weeks. Like the mitzvah that we do today. We say ayim yaim so on. Shehaims this and this amount of weeks. So you have to count both the days and the weeks. So what is he trying to say? That you count only days and then you come to the 30th day or the 31st day. So because you were counting only days, when you come to the Chodesh is only 1 day. And you can't bring the karbanis after that 1 day. When you get to Shavuos though, since you're counting not only days, you're counting weeks. So when you come to Shavuos, so the whole week of Shavuos is considered to be a week of the karbanis. So Adarabah, each one accordingly. The Chodesh you count the days and in Shavuos you count the weeks. So it's not Adarabah. So this itself is the source of why we have the days of Tashlumin the entire week. Another point he says, V'oid, I'll bring you another source for this, that there's Tashlumin a whole week. Because, this is actually the point regarding Shavuos itself. Chag Shavuos Ksiv. The Yom Tov itself is called Chag Shavuos. Why is it called Chag Shavuos? Because it's after counting 7 weeks. That's the name of the Yom Tov. So you see that it's not just a Yom Tov of 1 day, but it's a Yom Tov that comes after counting the 7 weeks, and therefore you have another week for the whole Shavuos to bring the Karbanis. Now the Gemara brings another source for this Inyan that there's a Tashlumin for 7 days by Shavuos as well. The Beit Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov Tana and the Yeshiva of Elazar ben Yaakov, they taught the Braisa that said as follows. Omakra, the Pasuk by Shavuos says, the Karasem. The Pasuk over there says, regarding Shavuos, the Karasem betzam hayom hazeh mikra kodesh. And then right afterwards in the pasuk it says, the next pasuk, over kutzrechem, that when you cut the wheat in your field, so you have to leave over the peya and so on. So it speaks about the harvest in the field. So the question is, the pasuk just said we're talking about the Yom Tov. On a Yom Tov there is no harvest. How does the pasuk say right afterwards over kutzrechem that you're harvesting in the field? Ezeu chag shatekoyre v'koitzer, by which is a Yom Tov that you call it, that you refer to it as a holy day. The karasem that it should be betzam hayom hazeh mikra kodesh, and also kaitzad by. And you could also cut from the wheat in the field. Hava'ayim hazeh chag atzeres. This is referring to Shavuos. That's what the pasuk is speaking about. Now, Amos, when could this be that you're harvesting in the field on Shavuos? Ilem be Yom Tov. Is the pasuk talking about Yom Tov itself? K'tzire be Yom Tov mi shari. Are you allowed to cut the wheat in the field on Yom Tov itself? Elolav l'tashlumin. So this must be referring to the days of Tashlumin of Shavuos. And we refer to it also as a continuation of the Yom Tov, because that's when the Karbanis could be brought. And that is the time when the Pasuk is saying, V'kutzrechem, that you're harvesting in the field, and you should take the pay and so on. So from this Pasuk we see that on Shavuos, the celebration of the Yom Tov continues even after the day of Shavuos itself, which is also b'melacha. So now basically we have 2 sources for this inyan of Tashlumin. One source is what Rabbi Oishia brought before, that you compare Chag HaShavuos to Chag HaMatzos, that it's 7 days. And now the source over here from the pasuk that it says V'kutzrechem, and then it says before that the Karasem, that it refers also to the Yemei Tashlumin. So Gemara explains, Afagav the Itmid, Rabbi Elazar Rabbi Oishia, even though we already brought before the source from Rabbi Elazar Bar Oishia, Itzterich Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. We still also need this source here from Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. Why? If we would only have the source of the comparison to Chag HaMatzos, Hava Min, I would think to say, just like the days that you're mashlam, that you can bring the karbanos in the 7 days of matzos, of Pesach, it's also basiyas malacha, it's chalamayid, and you can't do malacha fully. There's an isra of asiyas malacha that applies to chalamayid. After shlumei atzeres, I would think also the days of Shavuos that you can make up for the karbanis, nami yasa basiyas malacha, they would also be asked to do malacha, at least like a chalamayid, kamash malan, that Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. That's why he learns out from Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, which tells me that Adarabah, those days that you can make up for the karbanis of the kutzrechem, you can go and do any work you want in the field. If I would only learn out from Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, lo yadayna kama, I wouldn't know how many days the Yemei Tashlumin are. I see from the pasuk that there are days of Yemei Tashlumin after the Yom Tov itself, when bekutzrechem, when you could harvest in the field, but I wouldn't know how many days that is. So therefore I have the limud that Rabbi Elazar Amar Rabbi Shia said that you learn out from Chag HaMatzis, and from there I see that the Yemei Tashlumin is 7 days, just like Pesach itself. So I need both of these psukim.